The ancient Egyptians believed the end of life marked the start of a challenging journey, the journey of the afterlife. To complete any journey, you need directions, a map, a guide, and for the ancient Egyptians, this would be known as the Book of the Dead, a guide to the underworld used to help the deceased navigate the dangers and obstacles they would encounter. Death is often seen as an end to human suffering.
So, for me, I don't know. I mean, I certainly would like to maintain health for a longer period of time. But I'm not afraid of dying. I think it will come as a relief.
But in ancient Egypt, people didn't quite think that way. For them, death was a life beyond, where the real agony would begin, and they would have to overcome all the obstacles in their way to finally meet the god of death, Osiris, who resides in his realm. There are two ways to reach Osiris's realm, by sea or land. Ancient Egyptians typically had a short lifespan, so the rituals surrounding death were an integral part of their culture. As we know, many of the best-known relics from Egypt are the pyramids, tombs, and mummies, and they reveal the time, effort, and resources people of the Nile were prepared to spend to ensure a successful afterlife. Spells and formulas that can aid the path through the next world first appeared on the walls of pyramids during the Egyptian 5th dynasty around 2350 BC. During this time, they were only found in the tombs of the upper echelons of Egyptian society. Such books were not available to all Egyptians. Carefully written and often beautifully illustrated books of the dead would have been beyond the resources of the majority of people. But some 400 years later, in the time of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, these pyramid texts evolved into coffin texts that were inscribed in coffins, tomb walls, and sometimes sheets of papyrus. They were partially derived from the earlier pyramid texts, reserved for royal use only, but contained substantial new material related to everyday desires, indicating a new target of audience of common people. Ordinary Egyptians who could afford a coffin had access to these funerary spells, and the pharaoh no longer had exclusive rights to an afterlife. As the modern name of this collection of some 1,185 spells implies, they were mostly inscribed on Middle Kingdom coffins. Due to the limited writing surfaces of some of these objects, the spells were often abbreviated, giving rise to long and short versions, some of which were later copied in the Book of the Dead, though the Egyptians themselves referred to it as the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The Book of the Dead continued to be used, albeit with evolutions, for the next 1500 years until great changes in the country undermined many of the Egyptian traditions. So what exactly was written in the Book of the Dead? Well, why don't we take a trip through the afterworld ourselves? But before that, don't forget to like and subscribe. So, after death, as an ancient Egyptian, you will probably find yourself wearing clean clothes and white sandals, and standing in a long hall supported by columns. On a throne to the far end of the room, you will see the figure of Osiris, the god of the underworld. 42 other gods will be surrounding you, and that includes mummified figures, swallower of shades, the bone breaker, and the eater of entrails. In front of you is the god, Thought, in the form of a baboon. He sits atop a pair of scales that will very shortly decide your eternal fate. This is Judgment Day, and failing this test will result in experiencing an agonizing second death. But luckily for you, you are the possessor of the Book of the Dead, and you know the secrets to surviving the afterlife. So you begin to speak to the first god, O Far Strider, who came forth from Heliopolis. I have done no falsehood. Then you turn to the second, O Fire Embracer, who came forth from Kiraha. I have not robbed. After death, Egyptians believed your Ba, spirit, would depart your body, but only temporarily. The Ba would need to return to your remains periodically, perhaps every night, and for this reunion to be successful, the body had to be intact. That's why Egyptians developed a complex process of mummification, because without it, your afterlife would be jeopardized. Halting decomposition was, however, not enough to guarantee that you would prevail in the next world. Your Ba would itself face several challenges on its journey, and the Book of the Dead was an invaluable aid to dealing with that. So the book was often placed in the coffin, sometimes even wrapped up with bandages of the mummy, ensuring that the words inside would follow you as you encountered the perils of life after death. There is no doubt that the next world was a dangerous place, haunted by monsters that echoed and exaggerated the wild beasts Egyptians might have encountered in the world of the living. You were, therefore, equipped with spells for fighting off serpents, crocodiles, beetles, snakes, and a frightening being known as the creature that swallows the ass. You might also encounter some unpleasant henchmen of Osiris, sharp of fingers, and the so-called slaughter place of the god. Fortunately, you are also provided with the means of fighting off evil, escaping traps, and avoiding decomposition and decapitation. Another scary prospect was being turned upside down, a fate that would play havoc with your digestive system. For this reason, a spell was included in some of the books of the dead for not eating excrements or drinking urine in the underworld, a vivid description of some of the horrors that might befall you. Your ba would have to pass through a series of gates, each of them guarded by a fearsome deity. Your knowledge of the gates and guards was crucial to your advancement, and this information was helpfully contained within the Book of the Dead. For example, when you approach the 6th gate, spell 146 advises you to declaim, "Make a way for me, for I know your name, and I know the name of the god who guards you. Mistress of darkness, loud of shouts, its height cannot be known from its breadth, and its extent in space cannot be discovered. Snakes are on it, of which the number is not known, it is fashioned before the inert one, is your name." You would claim the protection of the gods and assert your own worth. "Mine is a name greater than yours, mightier than yours upon the road of righteousness," says spell 144. The most important test of all would come at the so-called Hall of the Two Mats, where your life on earth would be judged. After answering the questions of the 42 mummified gods in the hall, you would approach the set of scales presided over by the jackal-headed god, Anubis. On one scale was the image of truth, and on the other, your own heart. If you had behaved well in the life, then the scale would balance and a rosy future would await you. But if the scale failed to balance, your next appointment would be with the devourer, a nightmarish beast with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the haunches of a hippo. The devourer would consume your heart, you would die the second death, and be gone forever. This was far from an appealing prospect, but fortunately the Book of the Dead offered a solution in the form of spell 30b. "O my heart of my mother, O my heart of my different forms, do not stand up as a witness against me, do not be opposed to me in the tribunal, do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance." Even if you had lived a bad life, you could get away with it by using the spell, which prevents your heart from spilling to the gods. This was the first time in history when you see the idea that your fate after death was dependent on your behavior when you were alive. However, it was not carried through to its logical conclusion because you could cheat your way around that particularly tricky moment. Once you have navigated your way through these difficult situations, where would you end up? There is no single goal in the Book of the Dead. It is a collection of texts that contains spells and texts from different periods and different localities in Egypt. Hence, there are several different possible endpoints you could reach on your journey. One possible destination would be to sail across the sky every day with the sun god Ra in his boat. A second option would be to live in the underworld with its resident god, Osiris. But the place that you would most like to visit was the Field of Reeds, an ideal version of Egypt in which you would continue many of your earthly activities. Plowing, reaping, eating, drinking, and copulating are all mentioned in the Book of the Dead in descriptions of this tempting place. The Field of Reeds was undoubtedly somewhere with strong agricultural connections. Part of the way that death was illustrated was through the agricultural cycle. You locked into the sun, which was the dominant source of light, energy, and warmth. It dictated the agricultural year, which was central to the farming economy. You also locked into the earth, where the idea that you went to the ground to die and could be resurrected was linked to the notion of agriculture and plant regrowth. These were very organic ways of looking at life and death. But until very recently, the Book of Dead was thought to be the go-to guidebook of the ancient Egyptians that had been discovered. But recently, ancient text has been discovered known as the Book of Two Ways, which is almost 4,000 years old, and was found in a few coffins from the Middle Egyptian necropolis of El Bershesh, which contains unique graphical representations of the realm of the afterlife, along with spells related to the journey of the deceased through the Duat. According to the archaeologist, this is undoubtedly the oldest archive of the book found to date, dating back to around 1600 BCE. This collection was the first example of an ancient Egyptian map of the underworld, and is a precursor to the New Kingdom books of the underworld as well as the Book of the Dead. In it are the persistent themes of the afterlife, which includes illustrations of gods and demons the deceased would encounter, as well as descriptions of the different regions of the underworld and the rituals that need to be performed. The two ways depicted are the land and water routes, separated by a lake of fire that leads to Ras Tau and the abode of Osiris. The oldest copy currently known belonged to a woman named Ankh, who lived during the reign of Ahanacht I. What do you think about this ancient guidebook of the dead? Comment down in the section below, and if you enjoyed this video, check out our other interesting videos on ancient Egypt.